Kick it.
Ahoy, mateys, and welcome aboard to This Week in Nickelodeon History. It's a pleasure to welcome you here as we celebrate some Nickelodeon anniversaries that have taken place in between the times of March 5th to March 11th. I am your host, Captain Eric, and it has been quite a wild week. Not in the Thornberrys department. I certainly can't talk to animals, and I don't have a nature show at this moment in time, but my work week has been wild, hence the tardiness, so bear with me, I do apologize. In the meantime, though, can you believe that in the last few days, Nickelodeon has seen its first rebrand since 2009? That's right, the Nickelodeon logo is changed for the better. The Splat is back. The Splat is back. The Splat is back. I keep thinking of that Mark Morrison song. The Splat is back. And for those who have no idea what I'm talking about, just search Nickelodeon and it should be some of the top results. In 2009, the Nickelodeon logo changed where they stylized the Nickelodeon font a little bit more. It was a really nice font, which I'm glad they kept, but they took away the chaos of the Splat logo, which doesn't necessarily have to be that iconic Splat, because for those who grew up in the 90s and through the 2000s know that Nickelodeon logo can be seen on any orange background of any design. Anything of orange could surround that logo, which, by the way, the 90s version of that Nickelodeon font was very simple in and of itself. It was a simple font within a chaos of orange, and that was Nickelodeon. That was that energy that the logo gave. Anytime you seen that orange and white pairing together, you knew you were in for something specific. But in 2009, when they took that Splat away and it was just a white logo, which would then be paired with orange still in some regard, but it was always muted. It was always like cut off, you know? Like a kid who grows up, who once had passions and then finds themselves in a mundane desk job staring at a wall. That's how it felt. Nickelodeon should never feel like that, honestly. You should always give off some sort of chaos, contained chaos in some way. And the new Splat logo, although it is not covering up the full font, it is there, it is prominent, and I hope it never leaves. It should never leave. The Splat is Nickelodeon's identity, and taking that away, it just feels wrong. For those who haven't even seen the new Ninja Turtles trailer, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, the upcoming animated movie from Nickelodeon Movies, go and watch that trailer at least even for the first few seconds to see a new Nickelodeon's movie logo that is new but is old at the same time. It feels fresh to see that. And even when it's not orange, when it's just a green Splat, it still feels pretty cool. I love the look of that. The trailer was great, so we'll obviously have more to talk about that on the channel, the Captain Eric channel down the road. But until then, let's stick with This Week in Nickelodeon History. The Splat is back. I'm glad to have that back, and that'll be the focus for this week's Top 5, so stay tuned for that. But this week we're going to start 23 years ago, all the way back on March 11th, 2000. We had the premiere of the drama Caitlin's Way. Created by Paul Bellos and Thomas W. Lynch, ran for 3 seasons of 52 episodes. The premise of the show sees Caitlin, played by Lindsay Felton, who is a young girl living in the city of Philadelphia, getting into a little bit of trouble, but finding herself in a culture shock, being thrown at her aunt's farm I believe, in the middle of Montana. So going from Philadelphia to Montana, and that is your little quick synopsis of the show. I remember watching a few episodes of Caitlin's Way at the time. I was 10, even at most 12, when this show was on air and still in production. So I think it probably was then when it was on the end later on that I was actually watching a few episodes of the show, and I enjoyed what I watched. It wasn't a show that I became a fan of. Dramas when you're 13 or 14, there has to be a little bit more, I think, to dig into, and if it doesn't reach whatever is going on in your life, it might be a little bit harder to enjoy at that age. I think when you're older and you've gone through enough, you can watch a few more of these kinds of drama shows and enjoy them in a different way. But at the time, it was a little tougher for me when it was like brand new. I would rather watch the Nicktoons. There was Cartoon Network on. There was other things. But I do hold this show in a slightly high regard. I remember it as being good. So if there are any fans of Caitlin's Way that can back up that feeling, let me know in the comments below. Teen Nick, though, I don't usually cover a lot of Teen Nick specifically, but the channel, which was based off of a block on Nickelodeon, actually had its start this week, surprisingly, 22 years ago on March 5th, 2002. Teen Nick was the successor to Snick, which was Saturday Night Nickelodeon, a little bit more of an older Nickelodeon for an older audience. Ren and Stimpy Show, Are You Afraid of the Dark, the shows that Nick wouldn't want to air during its daytime television spots. But then eventually Snick would cease to be part of Nick's larger branding, and eventually Teen Nick would take over as a slot on Nickelodeon, which is really on the forefront as far as what the programming is. I'm sure as far as that is concerned, somebody within Viacom at the time probably went with that idea. Probably that Snick is a good branding that they have, but it doesn't really say what it is. It's just a name. Whereas Teen Nick is very on Front Street as far as who they're trying to make their content for. So that was probably their way of, hey, Nick Jr. is pretty obvious, so let's change Snick up to make it even more obvious. Teen Nick wouldn't last as a block, though, because eventually it would grow until it was its own channel in the year 2009. So that's a anniversary little tidbit for Teen Nick there. But for another anniversary proper, we're going back all the way to the year 2012. 11 years ago, on March 10th, 2012, we had the premiere of the Nickelodeon TV movie Big Time Movie. The movie version of Big Time Rush was directed by Savage Steve Holland and was a massive hit for Nickelodeon, bringing over 13.1 million viewers over the weekend that it premiered. It's a little bit tougher to gauge how successful a TV movie would be compared to theatrical movies. There's a tangible presence you can actually point to and go, look, there's success. But I have to imagine, being off of a budget of $3.4 million, if Big Time Movie was actually released in theaters, I think they would have been able to bring that back very easily. Another TV movie premiered on Nickelodeon 11 years ago on March 11th, 2012, Winx Club, The Secret of the Lost Kingdom. Winx Club was created by Ignio Straffi and ran for 8 seasons of 208 episodes. This was a show developed by another company, Rainbow SPA, and had actually, I think, finished production of its original series that I remember premiering on Fox, a part of the Fox Box line of channels, or I think right when they switched to 4Kids TV. That's when Winx Club was a part of that. Either way, I didn't have any association with Winx Club the Nickelodeon. That was on a completely different channel. But in 2009, Nickelodeon's parent company, Viacom, which is just now known as Paramount altogether, Viacom purchased 30% into Rainbow SPA, therefore bringing the Winx Club over to Nickelodeon. That's where you get the little bridge from the old series, wherever you may have seen it, into the new series and future projects and where they land. 8 years ago, on March 5th, 2015, we had the final episode of The Haunted Hathaways on Nickelodeon. Created by Robert Peacock, the show ran for 2 seasons of 47 episodes. Tells the story of a family moving into a home in New Orleans where the home is actually already preoccupied by a man and his 2 sons who are actually all ghosts. But, it's a sitcom. They live together. I don't think I would want to live with a ghost, but, if it was a sitcom-style ghost family living in my house, they weren't malevolent, there weren't going to be any issues, and the only things I had to deal with were some laughter, quote-unquote, off-camera, and the fact that they would act like they were within a sitcom, I would be okay with that. That would be the one scenario in which I would be alright with a ghost living in my house. Every other time that a ghost could possibly live in your house and what they could bring, it's not a good time. It's not good. They're not going to bring you laughter. I'll tell you that much. Also, 8 years ago, on March 7th, 2015, we had the final episode of Awesomeness TV, created by Nickelodeon CEO Brian Robbins. Hello, Brian. The show ran for 2 seasons of 40 episodes. The show, hosted by Daniela Monet, put together a wide variety of sketches, hidden camera pranks, music videos, and other bits of constant changing content that you would see if your kid scrolls through YouTube, but now it's here in a controlled setting on your television. 4 years ago, on March 8th, 2019, the Nickelodeon TV movie Lucky premiered. Directed by Casey Burke Leonard, the animated movie is a look into the world of leprechauns and stars Kira Kosarin, Ron Funches, and the Joker himself, Mark Hamill. I know when you think of that name, Luke Skywalker, but no. When you're as iconic as the Joker, and you've locked that voice down as hard as that guy has, that's the name you bring up first. And that may be it for the anniversaries for this week, but now it is time for my top 5, and I actually, to be completely honest, one of the reasons things went a little higher this week was the fact that I actually had a top 5 ready to go that was done, and it was based on a property that I thought was in the second week of March and turns out was not. So going into recording the first time, because this is not the first time, I had a top 5 ready to go and then realized I can't use this. This is unusable. So very quickly, very off the cuff, I, in honor of the return of the Splat, want to give you 5 other very quick ideas that Nickelodeon can do to bring back more of that Nickelodeon energy that they once had but let go, or they went all clean SpongeBob on everybody. Hi, how are ya? None of that. Here's 5 things in no particular order that Nickelodeon can do to bring things back to a good classic feeling. Number 1, more Nicktoons, please. The live action shows are great. I'm sure they do well in the ratings. I'm sure for syndication rights they do well for other purposes. They're probably cheaper than animation, but they're nowhere near as iconic as the animated shows. I'm sorry. You can take the most iconic live action shows in Nickelodeon's history, and they still fall beyond their animated shows, their most iconic animated shows. Don't let me sit here and try to tell you that iCarly is not more iconic than something like Robot and Monster. No, no, no. I'm just saying SpongeBob, Reptar, Cat Dog even. You know, there's those icons, those things you can't really plaster a lot of live action stars as much as you can as the animated ones. Let's be real. People can make more mistakes than cartoons can. So that's a statement to stand by.
And that's a fact.
Number 1 was more Nicktoons. Number 2 is to feature more indents as they did throughout the 80s, 90s, 2000s. In between the shows, the branding for Nickelodeon always had some crazy, zany animation style you had never seen before. Sometimes it was stop motion, sometimes it was claymation, sometimes it was rotoscope. But Nickelodeon had some weird way to brand their channel that you would only see on that channel. But then at the end of that indent, you would see the classic Nickelodeon font. You would know, oh, this is home. And I feel like in the last couple of years, the last decade or so, the indents and the advertisements with the commercials, they always try to feature live action children, and I think we should just step away from that for a bit and get back to the animation. So even though number 2 is connected to number 1 with more animation, it's a different kind. Number 1 is just flat out feature those Nicktoons more. Number 2 is actually use animation in your commercial branding again. Number 3 is that schedule has to change up a little bit. Bring something new to the daily schedule. And I know what you're saying to yourself, well, if a show would just come along and have the same ratings as SpongeBob or Paw Patrol, then we would feature it as much. No, well, my counter argument to that is, how can a show possibly gain the popularity of SpongeBob and Paw Patrol if you're not featuring it as much as SpongeBob and Paw Patrol? You'd think it'd be that simple, but I guess not. Change up the schedule. Number 4 is bring back a solid Nicktoons night. I know that might be connected to the other ones too, but trust me, it's different here. I'm not talking about just Friday night Nicktoons. Make it a Sunday night thing. Make it a Monday night thing. Make a new Nicktoons night and stick to it. That is where the Nicktoons go. It's a different... Number 1 was building the car. Number 4 is building the garage around the car. Those are different ones. And number 5 is to restructure Nick at Night and do something with that. I've already had a top 5 about 5 possible shows you could feature on a new Nick at Night on a previous episode of This Week in Nickelodeon History. But Nick at Night, I know it's classically featured older sitcoms, and I myself have fond memories of Nick at Night. But Nick at Night could be something more, unless the ratings of those shows are undeniable, that they will just beat out any new kind of content. But there's already channels like TV Land that features the old stuff once it's not on Nick at Night anymore. And I'm even fine with the fact that Teen Nick has its own channel. Let's just make Nick at Night its own channel, where you can have more of that newer classic content that is different from TV Land, a new lily pad in the system that you can add in, and then you have an entire night block of Nickelodeon for an entire new landscape that doesn't have to go completely fully mature, but could still feature wildly original content that no one else is doing. A real chance for Nickelodeon to step in the ring, and that, my friends, is going to be This Week in Nickelodeon History. Thank you so much for coming aboard and being with me to celebrate these anniversaries. If you would like to follow the Captain on social media, you can do so at I'm Ready Podcast on Twitter and at SpongeBob Podcast on Instagram. If you have any questions or comments that you would like to write into the show, you can send me an email, nickelodeonhistory@gmail.com. The 2 ways you can support the Captain if you're here on the Ready Crew are by subscribing to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@thecaptaineric, or just click on the link in the podcast description below. Click on that subscribe button, And that is the absolute best way to show your support. I will never ask anything more of my fans. If you like what I do, hitting that subscribe is the best thing for you to do and to show your appreciation. If you would like to ever go the extra mile, though, you can click on that Redbubble link in the description where you can find a bunch of different art that I've made that you can put on a multitude of different products. Anything that comes in from my projects goes right back into my projects, and it's always appreciated. So really, guys, don't ever feel like you have to put any money into me, but if you ever do, just know it goes right back into all the stuff that I work on. I love you guys. Thank you so much for being a part of the Ready Crew. If you're listening to this voice this far in, well, then you might as well want to stick around. We only have 2 more weeks of This Week in Nickelodeon History in its current iteration, so please stay tuned, and I'll see you here next week. Thank you for coming aboard, and as always, please stay safe, be kind to one another, and come aboard again to another episode of This Week in Nickelodeon History.
I'm here with my friends, Nickelodeon, the song